In this video, we're diving deep into over 2 decades of Family Guy's most questionable moments. Let's get into it. The cutaway gag is Family Guy's signature move. That moment when a character says something that triggers a flashback or tangent completely unrelated to the main story. Let's start with one of the most notorious cutaway gags in Family Guy history. The AIDS Barbershop Quartet from the episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire. Peter is bragging about how good he is at delivering bad news, and this triggers a cutaway. We see Peter dressed as a Barbershop Quartet member, standing with 3 other singers around a hospital bed. A patient lies there, looking confused and concerned. Then Peter and the quartet launch into an upbeat song, informing this man that he has developed full-blown AIDS. The scene plays out like a cheerful musical number. The harmonies are tight. The choreography is synchronized, and the lyrics are telling a dying man about his terminal diagnosis while using the melody and energy of a celebration. The patient looks horrified as these 4 men sing and dance around his deathbed. The juxtaposition of the upbeat delivery with the devastating message is the entire joke. Death from a terrible disease presented as entertainment. This cutaway sparked immediate backlash. AIDS service organizations filed complaints. Advocacy groups called the joke tasteless and harmful. The DVD commentary later revealed that the writers made the song intentionally offensive because that was required for the joke to work. They knew exactly what they were doing. They crafted something designed to shock and upset people, and it worked. The controversy only brought more attention to the show. But here's what makes this cutaway particularly sus. AIDS wasn't some ancient history disease when this aired. Real people were dying. Real families were grieving. The stigma around AIDS was still causing harm to patients and their loved ones. And Family Guy decided the best use of their platform was a barbershop quartet singing about full-blown AIDS to a captive audience of 1 terrified patient. The joke isn't satirizing ignorance about AIDS. It's not commenting on how we talk about terminal illness. It's just using a deadly disease as the punchline, because shock equals funny in the Family Guy writers' room. Then there's the Michael J. Fox cutaway gags. And yes, that's plural, because Family Guy went back to this well multiple times. Michael J. Fox is one of the most beloved actors of his generation. Back to the Future made him a household name. His openness about living with Parkinson's disease has raised awareness and millions of dollars for research. And Family Guy decided to make jokes about his tremors. The most infamous example comes from the episode Tigs for Two. Peter is explaining what happened to one of his shirts. He sets up a cutaway about Michael J. Fox at a wine tasting party. But then Peter breaks the 4th wall. He stands against a plain background and tells the audience directly that they're not going to show this cutaway because it would make everyone sad. He describes the joke in detail. Michael J. Fox trying to taste wine, but spilling it everywhere because of his Parkinson's symptoms. Peter explains why this is too offensive to show, and then they show it anyway. The cutaway plays out exactly as Peter described. We see Michael J. Fox's character struggling with tremors while trying to handle a wine glass. The wine spills all over Peter's shirt. The scene lingers on the Parkinson's symptoms as the punchline. It's not clever. It's not satirical. It's just pointing at someone's medical condition and laughing. What makes this particularly gross is the fake-out. The show pretends to have standards. Peter literally says they won't show something this tasteless. The audience might think, oh, okay, they're acknowledging this crosses a line. But no, the acknowledgement is part of the joke. Look how edgy we are. We know this is wrong, and we're doing it anyway. Aren't we terrible? The self-awareness doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because it proves the cruelty is intentional. Seth MacFarlane has since said he regrets jokes about Michael J. Fox. But that hasn't stopped the show from referencing him multiple times. There's something particularly cowardly about making fun of someone's degenerative neurological condition. Michael J. Fox didn't do anything to deserve mockery. He's not a politician or a controversial figure. He's just an actor living with a disease. But Family Guy saw that vulnerability and decided it was comedy gold. Now let's talk about the JFK Pez dispenser. This one is from way back in Season 1, Episode 5, titled A Hero Sits Next Door. The scene is quick, but it packs a punch. A kid walks out of a store, proudly showing off his John F. Kennedy Pez dispenser. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out. The Pez dispenser's head explodes off, just like the president's actual assassination. The kid looks sad for about half a second. Then he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a Robert Kennedy Pez dispenser, saying he's glad he still has that one. Both Kennedy brothers were assassinated, John in 1963 and Robert in 1968. These were national tragedies that traumatized an entire generation. The Kennedy assassinations changed American politics and culture forever, and Family Guy thought the perfect joke was having their Pez dispenser heads shot off one after another. Seth MacFarlane himself has admitted this is the one joke he regrets most. In a Reddit AMA, he specifically called out the JFK Pez dispenser scene as something he wishes they hadn't done. The joke was so offensive that it was cut from earlier DVD releases of the show. But here's the thing, it still exists. It still aired on television. And it set the tone for everything that came after. This wasn't just a tasteless joke, it was a statement of intent. Family Guy was announcing to the world that nothing was off limits. Presidential assassinations, national trauma, historical tragedy. All of it was fair game for a quick throwaway gag. If they'd make this joke in Season 1, imagine what they'd be willing to do 20 seasons later. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Cutaway is another perfect example of Family Guy mistaking cruelty for comedy. This one appears in the episode The Splendid Source. Peter and the guys are on a road trip, and they drive past the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Peter points out a Vietnamese man who appears to be harassing American veterans. The cutaway shows 2 U.S. veterans standing at the memorial wall. They're paying respects to their fallen friends. Then, a Vietnamese veteran appears. He starts taunting them about soldiers he killed. He refers to the memorial wall as a scoreboard, like they're keeping track of video game kills. He points to specific names on the wall and brags about being the one who killed them. The American veterans look devastated while this man treats their trauma as a competition. The joke reduces the massive death toll of the Vietnam War to a sport. It mocks veterans who are grieving their friends. It presents a Vietnamese man as cruel and taunting when real Vietnamese people also suffered tremendously during that war. There's no satire here. There's no commentary on war or trauma or how we memorialize the dead. It's just, hey, wouldn't it be messed up if someone treated this sacred memorial like a scoreboard? The answer is yes, it would be messed up. That's not the same thing as it being funny. But the absolute worst example of a cutaway gag intersecting with real-world tragedy is the Boston Marathon scene from Turban Cowboy. This episode aired on March 17th, 2013. In it, there's a cutaway where Peter brags about winning the Boston Marathon. The scene cuts to show the marathon in progress with hundreds of runners. Then, we see Peter driving his car through the crowd of runners. People are being hit and killed as Peter plows through them in his vehicle to cross the finish line first. On April 15th, 2013, less than a month after this episode, aired the Boston Marathon bombing occurred. 2 bombs exploded near the finish line, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds more. The terrorist attack shocked the nation and devastated the Boston community. Suddenly, that cutaway gag wasn't just tasteless, it was eerily prescient in the worst possible way. Fox immediately pulled the episode from streaming services. They removed it from Fox.com and Hulu. The network announced they had no plans to air it again. The episode didn't return to circulation until September 2022, over 9 years later. Now, to be clear, the cutaway had Nothing to do with the actual bombing. It was a coincidence. The Family Guy writers didn't predict terrorism, but that coincidence reveals something important about the show's approach to humor. They were willing to show mass death at a real event as a throwaway joke. The Boston Marathon isn't fictional. It's an actual race that happens every year with real participants. And Family Guy's first instinct was to depict Peter murdering everyone there. When tragedy struck in real life, it exposed how hollow and cruel that joke always was. It wasn't funny before the bombing. It just hadn't intersected with reality yet. The bombing forced everyone to confront what that cutaway actually depicted. Mass murder at a beloved sporting event. The violent deaths of innocent people used as a quick gag. There's no satirical point being made. Peter isn't learning a lesson about cheating or violence. It's just carnage for the sake of carnage. Then we have the Conway Twitty cutaways, which deserve mention for completely different reasons. Conway Twitty was a country music legend who passed away in 1993. Starting in season 7, Family Guy began, including extended clips of Conway Twitty performances as cutaway gags. Not parodies, not jokes about Conway Twitty, just actual footage of Conway Twitty singing his songs. These cutaways would sometimes run for 3 full minutes. In The Juice is Loose, they show Conway Twitty performing an entire song while Peter tries to distract Lois from being angry. The episode basically stops dead for 3 minutes of country music. No jokes happen during this time. No commentary. Just Conway Twitty singing. The running gag appeared multiple times across several seasons. Each time, the show would grind to a halt for several minutes of vintage country music performance. Fans were divided. Some found the absurdity of it hilarious. Others felt like the show was just padding runtime with public domain footage because they couldn't come up with actual jokes. What makes the Conway Twitty cutaways serious isn't offensive content. It's laziness masquerading as comedy. These aren't jokes. They're the absence of jokes. The show is essentially saying, we could write something funny here, but instead, here's 3 minutes of Conway Twitty. The meta humor of that premise works exactly once. By the 4th or 5th time, they did it the gag had worn out its welcome. But Family Guy kept going back to the Conway Twitty well because it was easy filler. The Aquaman cutaway from Baby Not on Board is particularly disturbing. Stewie makes a comment comparing his father's usefulness to Aquaman. This triggers a cutaway showing a woman being assaulted on a beach. She's crying for help. In the distance, we see Aquaman's head pop up from the ocean. The woman begs him to help her, but Aquaman refuses to leave the water. He claims his powers don't work on land. He throws a starfish at the attacker, which does nothing. He threatens to bring fish back up. The woman desperately asks why he won't help, and Aquaman gives an insensitive response about being confined to the ocean. The joke is supposed to be about Aquaman's reputation as a useless superhero. He's mocked for having water-based powers that don't translate to land. But the vehicle for this joke is watching someone being assaulted while a superhero refuses to help. The scene lingers on her pleas for help. We hear her fear and desperation. And it's all played for laughs because Aquaman is useless. This cutaway takes a serious crime and uses it as setup for superhero mockery. The assault isn't the point. The woman's trauma isn't the point. She's just a prop to illustrate why Aquaman is a lame superhero. Real people experience assault. Real victims have cried for help while bystanders did nothing. And Family Guy decided that was the perfect framework for a joke about comic book characters. The Abandoned Babies musical number is one of the strangest and most disturbing cutaways in the show's history. It appears in the episode Play It Again, Brian, during a scene at prom. A girl drops something in a dumpster. Then we see that it's an abandoned baby with a Sinatra-like voice. The baby starts singing a jazzy blues number about being abandoned by his mother. Soon, other discarded infants join in. They're all singing and dancing while using their umbilical cords like canes in a choreographed musical performance. The visual is simultaneously creative and horrifying. Baby abandonment is a real tragedy. Infants die when they're left in dumpsters. It's not hypothetical. It happens. And Family Guy's response was to create a musical number where the abandoned babies sing about their situation in the style of old Hollywood. The juxtaposition of innocent babies with the dark subject matter is the entire joke. Look how disturbing this is, isn't that funny? The musical number is actually well produced. The animation is smooth. The choreography works. The song is catchy in a deeply uncomfortable way. This cutaway took effort to create. Someone had to write the song. Animators had to bring it to life. Voice actors had to perform it. Multiple people in the production process looked at singing abandoned babies, dancing with their umbilical cords, and said, yes, this is what we should spend our time and budget creating. What's particularly sus about many of these cutaway gags is how long they run. A quick offensive joke is one thing. You can argue it's just shock humor that moves on quickly. But Family Guy often lingers on these disturbing scenarios. The AIDS Barbershop Quartet isn't a 5-second flash. It's a full musical performance. The Conway Twitty gags run for multiple minutes. The abandoned babies get a complete song and dance number. The show isn't just acknowledging something dark and moving on. It's dwelling in that darkness and asking you to sit with it. This is where the cutaway structure becomes a problem. In a normal narrative episode, you'd have to justify why these scenes exist. How do they move the story forward? What do they reveal about the characters? But in a cutaway gag, none of that matters. Peter can say, "This reminds me of that time," and suddenly we're watching something completely disconnected from anything else in the episode. There's no consequence, no lesson learned, no impact on the characters or plot. That freedom has allowed Family Guy to include content that serves no purpose beyond shock value. The cutaways don't have to mean anything. They don't have to go anywhere. They just have to exist for 15 to 30 seconds. And then we're back to the main story like nothing happened. It's comedy without context or consequence. And that's exactly when comedy can become cruel. The show has occasionally made meta jokes about its own cutaway structure. Peter has forgotten what he was talking about after an extended cutaway. Characters have acknowledged when a cutaway goes on too long. In the crossover episode with The Simpsons, Peter tries to get Homer to set up a cutaway gag, and Homer is confused, because that's not how The Simpsons works. These moments of self-awareness show that the writers know exactly what they're doing with this structure. But self-awareness doesn't equal accountability. Acknowledging that your cutaway gags are random and sometimes offensive doesn't make them less random and offensive. It just means you're doing it on purpose. And when the harm is intentional, it's harder to forgive than if it was just careless. Over 22 seasons, Family Guy has produced hundreds of cutaway gags. Most of them are harmless. Some are actually clever. But scattered throughout are these moments that cross from edgy comedy into something darker. Jokes about real tragedies. Mockery of people's medical conditions. Depictions of violence and assault used as punchlines. Musical numbers about dead babies. And all of it delivered with the same bright animation and cheerful energy that makes the darkness even more jarring. The cutaway gag structure is Family Guy's greatest strength and its biggest weakness. It allows for creativity and randomness that keeps the show unpredictable. But it also enables lazy writing and shock humor that mistakes being offensive for being funny. And when you compile all of these questionable cutaways together, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. This is a show that has consistently chosen to push boundaries, not because it has something important to say, but because pushing boundaries generates attention. And attention generates ratings. The controversy is the point. The outrage is free advertising. Every time a watchdog group complains about Family Guy, more people tune in to see what the fuss is about. The cutaway gags we've covered here are just the most notorious examples. There are dozens more scattered across hundreds of episodes. Quick flashes of disturbing content that might not register on first viewing, but reveal a pattern when examined as a whole. Family Guy has built an empire on being willing to go places other shows won't. And sometimes those places are genuinely funny, but sometimes those places are just cruel. Glenn Quagmire. If there's one character in Family Guy that embodies the show's most problematic tendencies, it's this guy. Voiced by Seth MacFarlane himself, Quagmire is Peter's neighbor and friend. He's a commercial airline pilot. He lives at 29 Spooner Street, and he is, without question, one of the most disturbing characters in animated television history. On the surface, Quagmire is played as a wacky, sex-obsessed neighbor. His catchphrase, "giggity, giggity goo," has become iconic. He's presented as a relic from the 1950s Rat Pack era with his smoking jacket and swinging bachelor lifestyle. Seth MacFarlane has described him as being based on fast-talking radio jockeys from the 1950s on cocaine. That's the intent. A cartoonish exaggeration of mid-century sexual attitudes played for laughs. But when you actually examine Quagmire's behavior across the series, the laughs die pretty quickly. This isn't just a guy who likes women. This is a character who displays predatory behavior in nearly every episode he appears in. The show has depicted him engaging in, or expressing interest in, virtually every illegal sexual behavior you can imagine. And it's all played as comedy, because hey, that's just Quagmire being Quagmire. Let's start with his obsession with Lois Griffin. Quagmire has been in love with, or at least in lust with Peter's wife, since before Peter even met her. The episode Meet the Quagmires establishes that Quagmire knew both Peter and Lois before they got together. His attraction to her isn't a recent development. It's been simmering for decades. This wouldn't be particularly problematic if it was just an unrequited crush. Lots of sitcoms have that dynamic, but Quagmire's interest in Lois goes way beyond admiring from afar. He's constantly making sexual comments about her. He ogles her whenever she's around. He's made multiple attempts to seduce her or engineer situations where Peter would be out of the picture. When sexual comments are made, to or by Lois Quagmire can be heard saying "oh yeah" or "giggity," even when he's not physically present in the scene. He's that attuned to anything involving her sexuality. The show presents this as a running gag. Quagmire wants to sleep with his best friend's wife and isn't subtle about it. Peter is usually too oblivious to notice or care. Lois is aware of it, but doesn't seem particularly threatened. It's normalized through repetition. After 22 seasons of Quagmire making the same inappropriate comments about Lois, they just become background noise. But normalized doesn't mean acceptable. In real life, a man who spent decades openly expressing sexual desire for his neighbor's wife while making constant advances would be a problem. That's not charming or funny. That's harassment. That's a friendship that should have ended long ago. But in the world of Family Guy, it's just Quagmire being Quagmire. Then there's his interest in Meg. Meg is Peter and Lois's teenage daughter. She's established as being underage throughout most of the series, and Quagmire has made it crystal clear that he's counting down until her 18th birthday. He's explicitly stated his interest in teenage girls, including Peter's daughter. The moment they turn 18, Quagmire considers them fair game, regardless of how long he's known them, or the inappropriateness of the age gap. There's an episode where Quagmire discovers a young cheerleader tied up in a bathroom. His immediate reaction is excitement at the opportunity. The show played this for shock value. Look how terrible Quagmire is. But there's a point where a character crosses from amusingly flawed to genuinely disturbing. A middle-aged man getting excited about finding a bound teenage girl isn't funny, dark humor. It's depicting a sex crime and asking us to laugh at the perpetrator's enthusiasm. The show has also established that Quagmire has an entire arsenal of tools and techniques for his predatory behavior. he's mentioned having built something called the Holder Downer 5000. The name tells you exactly what it's for. He's developed an immunity to mace through repeated exposure. Think about what that implies. He's been maced so many times by women defending themselves that his body has adapted. That's not a punchline. That's evidence of a pattern of assault. In various episodes, Quagmire has been shown or mentioned engaging in necrophilia. The episode Airport 07 had a cutaway that was so disturbing, Fox censored it. The cutaway implied Quagmire had sex with a dead virgin at her funeral. The Parents Television Council cited this as one of their complaints about the show. Even by Family Guy standards, this crossed a line. The cutaway only appears in uncensored versions of the episode. The show has also implied Quagmire has engaged in zoophilia. He's made comments about animals. He's been shown in situations with animals that are played for disturbing humor. The episode establishes him as someone with virtually no sexual boundaries. If it exists, Quagmire has either done it or wants to do it. And the show presents this as his defining character trait. Quagmire even has his own theme song. It appears in episodes like Breaking Out is Hard to Do, and the uncensored version of Airport 07. The song starts with an announcer asking who else but Quagmire, followed by a musical number where studio singers list his various sexual exploits. The last line has Quagmire himself singing giggity, 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 let's have sex. Then the song cuts to serious settings like a fancy dinner party or a funeral. Quagmire performs outrageous sexual acts that shock everyone present. It's presented as his calling card. One of the darkest Quagmire storylines involves him drugging the Bachelorette. In an episode parodying the reality show, The Bachelor Quagmire is a contestant. He drugs the woman at the center of the show so he can have his way with her. This isn't implied. It's explicitly shown. Quagmire uses Rohypnol or a similar substance to incapacitate a woman for sexual purposes. That's not a character flaw. That's rape. And it's presented as just another example of Quagmire's outrageous behavior. Later in that same storyline, Quagmire expresses interest in having a threesome with the Bachelorette and his own mother simultaneously. The show has established that Quagmire has a deeply dysfunctional relationship with his mother. She acted sexually toward him when he was younger. Other episodes have implied they may have actually had a sexual relationship. This isn't played as trauma. It's played as more evidence of how twisted Quagmire's sexuality is. The episode Quagmire's Baby introduces the revelation that Quagmire has a daughter named Anna Lee. He discovers her existence and initially tries to be a father, but eventually he puts her up for adoption. What makes this particularly disturbing is Quagmire's comment at the end. After giving her up, he says he might see her again in 18 years. The implication is clear and absolutely horrifying. He's counting down until his own daughter reaches legal age. The show walked this back in later episodes. No Giggity, No Doubt features Quagmire trying to be a father to a newly discovered daughter. But the damage was done. Family Guy had depicted a character making a sexual comment about his own infant daughter's future. That's not edgy humor. That's depicting someone who should be in prison. But Anna Lee isn't Quagmire's only child. The show has strongly implied he has fathered numerous children across multiple continents. He's a commercial airline pilot with layovers around the world. Nearly every episode that features Quagmire traveling includes jokes about him leaving behind pregnant women. These aren't relationships. These aren't consensual encounters that happen to result in pregnancy. The implication is that Quagmire has left a trail of abandoned children everywhere he's been. The show has explicitly stated Quagmire has multiple sexually transmitted diseases. He's built up immunities to some of them. His medical history would be a textbook case of someone engaging in risky behavior without protection or concern for partners. And again, this is all presented as comedy. Look at this gross man with all these diseases from all his sexual conquests. The fact that he's spreading these diseases to unknowing partners isn't part of the joke, but it's the logical conclusion of what's being depicted. Quagmire's relationship with Cleveland's wife, Loretta, is another example of behavior that crosses into unforgivable territory. The episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire reveals that Quagmire has been having an affair with Loretta. This isn't a one-time mistake. It's an ongoing betrayal of Cleveland, who is supposed to be his friend. The affair eventually leads to Cleveland and Loretta's divorce. Cleveland is devastated. His family is destroyed. And it's because his friend decided sleeping with his wife was more important than loyalty. But the show didn't stop there. In Love, Blatchley, Quagmire sleeps with Cleveland's girlfriend, Carolyn. Then, in the Cleveland Show spin-off, Quagmire asks Cleveland if he can sleep with his new wife, Donna. There's a pattern here. Quagmire specifically targets women that Cleveland is romantically involved with. It's not coincidence. It's a character trait. And it reveals something deeply twisted about how Quagmire views friendship and boundaries. The episode Quagmire's Dad introduces us to Dan Quagmire, who later transitions and adopts the name Ida. The episode itself sparked massive controversy for how it handled transgender issues. But within that episode, there's another disturbing Quagmire moment. Brian ends up sleeping with Ida before knowing about her transition. When Quagmire finds out, he's furious. But his anger isn't really about protecting his father. It's rooted in transphobia and his own sexual hang-ups. The episode reveals more layers of how twisted Quagmire's worldview is. Then there's the episode Screams of Silence, The Story of Brenda Q, which introduces Quagmire's sister, Brenda. She's in an abusive relationship with a man named Jeff. The episode attempts to tackle domestic violence as a serious topic, but it does so through the lens of Family Guy's humor, which doesn't work. Peter makes jokes about the abuse. The guys eventually decide to murder Jeff, rather than help Brenda escape through legal means. And Quagmire's relationship with his sister reveals another dysfunctional family dynamic. What makes Brenda's storyline relevant to understanding Quagmire is the contrast. Quagmire is rightfully angry about his sister being abused. He wants to protect her from Jeff's violence, but Quagmire himself has been depicted as engaging in behavior that ranges from harassment to assault. He drugs women. He targets underage girls the moment they turn 18. He violates boundaries constantly. The show wants us to see him as a hero for protecting his sister, while ignoring that his own behavior makes him exactly the kind of man sisters need protection from. In Quagmire's Quagmire, the tables turn and Quagmire finds himself in an abusive relationship. He meets a woman named Sonia who shares his interests, but Sonia's version of a relationship involves physically abusing Quagmire. He shows up to the bar with black eyes. His friends have to rescue him, and the episode plays this as comeuppance. See what it feels like, Quagmire. But the episode also includes a deeply problematic moment. When Quagmire is finally free from Sonia, he admits that he prefers being in control. This line is played as explaining why the relationship didn't work for him. But think about what that means in the context of everything else we know about Quagmire. He prefers being in control during sexual encounters. He's built devices to hold women down. He's drugged partners. He targets vulnerable or younger women. That admission isn't just about preferring dominance in consensual relationships. It's confirming the predatory pattern the show has been depicting for over 20 seasons. The episode The Giggity Wife features Quagmire getting married in a parody of The Bachelor. His new wife seems perfect for him. She shares all his interests and fetishes, but the relationship falls apart, and Quagmire ends up back to his old ways. The episode could have been an opportunity to develop his character or show growth. Instead, it reinforced that Quagmire is incapable of change. He's always going to be the predatory neighbor making inappropriate comments and engaging in illegal behavior. What's particularly disturbing about Quagmire is how the show has normalized his behavior through repetition. In early seasons, his sexual deviance was shocking. It stood out. But after hundreds of episodes of the same jokes and the same behavior, it becomes wallpaper. We're so used to Quagmire being terrible that we stop reacting to how terrible he actually is. The show has desensitized us to depictions of predatory behavior by making it a character's defining trait and playing it for laughs every single episode. The Parents Television Council has specifically called out Quagmire as providing some of the tawdriest moments in Family Guy. That's saying something given how much the PTC hates this show overall. Quagmire stands out even in a series known for pushing boundaries. His character is so consistently awful that he's become the poster child for Family Guy's most problematic elements. Seth MacFarlane's decision to voice Quagmire himself is interesting. MacFarlane voices several characters on the show, including Peter and Stewie. But Quagmire required a specific voice based on those 1950s radio personalities. The fast-talking delivery, combined with the creepy catchphrase, creates a character who sounds cartoonish, even while depicting serious crimes. The voice creates distance between the character and reality. It signals this isn't meant to be taken seriously. But that distance is exactly the problem. By making Quagmire's voice so exaggerated and cartoonish, the show can depict increasingly disturbing behavior while maintaining the comedy framework. If Quagmire sounded like a normal person saying the same things, the jokes wouldn't work. The audience would be too uncomfortable. The cartoony voice gives the writers permission to go darker because it doesn't sound real. But the behavior being depicted is real. Those crimes happen. Those victims exist. The show has occasionally tried to add depth to Quagmire, beyond just sex obsession. He's a voracious reader who participates in local book clubs. His house is decorated in 1950s and 1960s style, reflecting his nostalgia for that era. He's a Navy veteran. These details suggest there's more to him than just the giggity guy. But the show always returns to the sexual deviance as his core characteristic. Any depth is window dressing on a character fundamentally built around depicting predatory behavior. Quagmire's feud with Brian is one of the longest running conflicts in the show. The episode Jerome is the New Black features a scene where Quagmire tears into Brian, listing everything he hates about him. It's a brutal takedown that many fans consider one of the best scenes in the series. Quagmire calls out Brian's pretentiousness, hypocrisy, and bad behavior. He's absolutely right about everything he says. But here's the thing. Quagmire has no moral high ground to judge anyone. He's infinitely worse than Brian in every measurable way. Brian is pretentious and sometimes selfish. Quagmire is a sex criminal. The show wants us to enjoy Quagmire calling out Brian's flaws while ignoring that Quagmire himself is irredeemable. It's cognitive dissonance that only works if you don't think too hard about it. The worst part about Quagmire as a character is that he faces no consequences. He's never arrested, despite clearly committing numerous crimes. His friends know about his behavior and continue associating with him. Peter hangs out with him constantly. Joe is a police officer who witnesses Quagmire's confessions and does nothing. Cleveland remained friends with him even after Quagmire destroyed his marriage. The show has established a world where everyone just accepts that Quagmire is a predator, and that's fine. In one episode, it's revealed that Quagmire's parents prevented him from going to prison multiple times. They covered for him. They used their influence to keep him out of trouble. This confirms that his behavior has risen to criminal levels that should have resulted in incarceration. But it also means someone was always there to bail him out. Quagmire has never faced real accountability for his actions. The show has even implied Quagmire has been with Marge Simpson. In a crossover reference, there's a suggestion that during one of his travels, Quagmire somehow ended up with Homer's wife. This joke exists purely for shock value. Can you believe Quagmire got with Marge? But it's also asserting that no character in any show is safe from his predatory behavior. The joke transcends universes. As Family Guy has continued over the years, some of Quagmire's more explicitly criminal behaviors have been toned down. The show announced in 2019 that they were phasing out certain types of jokes. There's been a slight shift in how they portray some characters, but the core of who Quagmire is hasn't changed. He's still defined by his sex obsession. He's still making inappropriate comments. He's still crossing boundaries. The show just isn't being quite as explicit about the illegal stuff. But you can't undo 20 years of depicting a character as a sex criminal. Quagmire's history doesn't disappear because new episodes are slightly less offensive. All those earlier episodes still exist. They're still in syndication. New viewers discovering the show are still watching Quagmire drug women and target teenagers. The character's legacy is set. What makes Quagmire such a perfect example of Family Guy's most problematic elements is that he started as a one-note joke and evolved into a monument to the show's worst instincts. In early episodes, he was just the horny neighbor, a standard sitcom archetype. But as the show pushed boundaries and competed with itself to be more outrageous, Quagmire became the vehicle for increasingly disturbing content. Each season had to top the previous one. Each episode had to reveal something new and shocking about his behavior. The result is a character who should be in prison, who should have no friends, who should be ostracized from society. But instead, he's a beloved member of the main cast. He gets his own storylines and episodes. Fans quote his catchphrase, "He's on merchandise." Quagmire has been normalized not just within the world of the show, but in pop culture. And that normalization of predatory behavior, disguised as comedy, is perhaps the most sus thing about him. Giggity, giggity, goo indeed. Brian Griffin and Stewie Griffin are arguably the breakout stars of Family Guy. The talking dog and the genius baby have become the heart of the show in many ways. Their adventures together have produced some of the series' best episodes. The Road To episodes are fan favorites. Their dynamic is genuinely compelling, but it's also generated some of the most disturbing content in the entire series. Let's start with the big one. The episode that had the Parents Television Council filing complaints with the FCC. The one that's still talked about over a decade later as one of the grossest moments in television history. We're talking about Brian and Stewie, and specifically, the diaper scene. Brian and Stewie aired in May 2010 as the 150th episode of Family Guy. It's a bottle episode, meaning it takes place in one location with minimal cast. Brian and Stewie get locked in a bank vault over a weekend. They're trapped together with no way out until Monday morning. The episode features no cutaway gags, no music over the credits. Just two characters voiced by the same actor having conversations and dealing with their situation. For most of its runtime, the episode is surprisingly good. Brian and Stewie have genuine conversations about their relationship and their fears. There's real character development. It's the kind of episode that shows Family Guy can do more than just random gags when the writers actually try. But then there's the diaper situation. Stewie is still in diapers. Being trapped in a vault all weekend means eventually nature calls. Stewie soils his diaper. This creates a medical problem. If he stays in a dirty diaper too long, he'll develop a rash and potentially an infection. But they don't have a clean diaper. They don't have supplies. They're stuck in a vault with no options. Stewie's solution is that Brian needs to eat the contents of the diaper. Then they can put the clean diaper back on. Brian is understandably horrified. He refuses, but Stewie manipulates him by pulling out a gun and threatening him. Eventually, Brian agrees, and the show depicts him eating the contents of Stewie's diaper. Now, to be fair, we don't actually see the feces. The camera doesn't show us graphic imagery of dog eating baby waste, but we hear it. We hear every sound. We see Brian's face contorted in disgust. We see Stewie's horrified reactions. The audio design makes your brain fill in all the details, the animation doesn't show. In some ways, that makes it worse. Your imagination creates images more disturbing than anything they could have animated, and it doesn't stop there. The sight of Brian eating his waist causes Stewie to vomit. Then Brian eats the vomit too. The scene goes on and on. It's not a quick gag that the episode moves past. It lingers. It dwells in the grossness. Multiple minutes of runtime are devoted to this sequence. After Brian finishes, he has to lick Stewie clean. Again, we don't see it explicitly, but we hear everything. The Parents Television Council filed a formal complaint with the FCC, citing this scene as a violation of broadcast standards. Their complaint focused on depictions of excretory activities. The FCC has rules about what can be shown on broadcast television. The PTC argued this scene crossed that line. Tim Winter, the PTC president, called it explicitly obscene. The FCC ultimately took no action. Their ruling essentially said that because we don't actually see the feces, the scene didn't violate community standards. The sounds and implications weren't enough to constitute a violation. This is the same loophole that allows Family Guy to get away with so much. As long as the worst stuff happens just off screen, or is only implied, the show can claim it's not really depicting it. But here's the thing about that scene. It's not just gross for the sake of being gross. It's a violation of their relationship dynamics. Stewie uses a gun to force Brian into doing something degrading. That's not friendship. That's coercion. And while Brian is a dog, and dogs sometimes eat disgusting things, the show has established Brian as essentially human in his psychology. He's not operating on dog instincts here. He's a fully sentient being, forced to do something humiliating. The episode tries to balance this out with genuine emotional moments. Later, Brian reveals he keeps a gun in his safety deposit box because he's considered suicide. He talks about feeling purposeless and wondering if his life matters. Stewie comforts him. They have a touching conversation about friendship and finding meaning in making others happy. It's genuinely well-written drama. But you can't unring the bell. The diaper scene poisons everything around it. Critics noted that without that extended gross-out sequence, the episode would have been one of the best things Family Guy ever produced. Instead, it's remembered primarily for the most disgusting scene in the show's history. The emotional depth gets overshadowed by the literal waste-eating. Then there's Stewie is enceinte, which might be even more disturbing than the diaper episode. Enceinte is French for pregnant. The episode title tells you exactly where this is going. Stewie notices Brian growing distant. He's worried about losing his best friend. So Stewie comes up with a solution. He steals Brian's DNA and impregnates himself with human-dog hybrid babies. Let's break down everything wrong with this premise. First, Stewie is a baby. The show depicts a baby getting pregnant. Second, the pregnancy results from Stewie stealing genetic material without consent. That's a violation of Brian's bodily autonomy. Third, the resulting offspring are human-dog hybrids, which raises all sorts of disturbing biological questions. And fourth, the entire thing is played as Stewie being clingy rather than Stewie doing something deeply wrong. The episode shows Stewie going through pregnancy. His stomach swells. He experiences pregnancy symptoms. And eventually, he gives birth to 7 human-puppy hybrid creatures. These things look exactly as disturbing as you'd imagine. They have features of both humans and dogs in ways that hit right in the uncanny valley. They're animated to be grotesque. The adults in the Griffin family never notice that Stewie is pregnant. He walks around with a visibly swollen belly, and no one comments on it. He gives birth in the house, and no one hears. This is a running joke in Family Guy, that the family can't understand Stewie and barely pays attention to him. But in this context, it means a baby went through pregnancy and childbirth with no medical care or adult supervision. Brian and Stewie then have to figure out what to do with these hybrid children. They can't let the family find out. they have to hide 7 creatures that shouldn't exist. The episode focuses on their attempts to manage this situation they've created. And throughout it all, the show treats Stewie's initial violation as a wacky scheme rather than something serious. The episode is controversial for obvious reasons. The biological implications alone are disturbing. But it's also playing with themes of reproductive coercion. Stewie forced Brian into fatherhood without his consent. He used Brian's genetic material to create life for selfish reasons. In any other context, this would be recognized as a serious violation. But because it's a cartoon baby and a talking dog, it's presented as absurdist comedy. What makes this episode particularly sus is that it sexualizes the relationship between Brian and Stewie in uncomfortable ways. The show has always been careful to keep their friendship platonic. They're best friends despite the age difference and species difference. But this episode crosses a line. Pregnancy and reproduction are inherently connected to sexuality. By having Stewie impregnate himself. With Brian's DNA, the show is introducing sexual undertones to their relationship. The show tries to frame it as Stewie wanting to be closer to Brian. He wants to create a permanent bond between them. The hybrid babies are supposed to represent their connection. But that framing doesn't make it less disturbing. There are infinite ways Stewie could have tried to get closer to Brian that don't involve creating hybrid offspring. The Road To episodes are generally beloved by fans, but they're not without their own questionable moments. These episodes parody the old Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road movies. Stewie and Brian go on adventures together, usually involving time travel or interdimensional travel. They have musical numbers. They get into dangerous situations. It's a formula that's produced some great episodes. But Road to the North Pole gets incredibly dark. Stewie and Brian encounter a rude mall Santa and decide to travel to the actual North Pole to confront the real Santa Claus. What they find is disturbing. Santa exists, but he's been driven to the breaking point by consumerism and impossible demands. His workshop is a nightmare. The elves are suffering. The reindeer are in terrible condition. It's a grim subversion of Christmas mythology. The episode depicts Santa as exhausted and bitter. He's been working nonstop for centuries, trying to keep up with children's demands. The workshop conditions are shown to be horrific. This is all played for dark comedy, but it's genuinely upsetting in ways the show might not have intended. The images of suffering elves and overworked magical creatures stick with you. Brian and Stewie try to help, but they only make things worse. They attempt to deliver presents themselves and fail catastrophically. Children around the world wake up disappointed. The episode ends with Brian and Stewie feeling guilty about ruining Christmas. It's meant to be a story about appreciating what you have, but the journey there involves some truly grim imagery. Road to Rhode Island is the first of the Road episodes, and it's much lighter in tone. Brian picks up Stewie from his grandparents' summer home, but they lose their tickets home. They take a road trip back to Quahog and bond along the way. The episode features musical numbers and genuine character development. It earned an Emmy nomination. But even this relatively wholesome episode has a dark moment. Brian takes Stewie to the puppy mill where Brian was born. They find Brian's mother living in terrible conditions. She doesn't even recognize him. It's a brief but painful glimpse at Brian's traumatic origin. The show uses it to add depth to Brian's character, but it's also depicting animal abuse for emotional manipulation. The relationship between Brian and Stewie has evolved significantly over the course of the series. In early seasons, Stewie wanted to kill his mother, Lois, and build weapons. Brian was the cynical voice of reason. They barely interacted, but as the show progressed, the writers realized these two characters had great chemistry. They started pairing them up more often. Eventually, they became essentially the main duo of the show. This evolution has been mostly positive for the series. Brian and Stewie episodes are often better written than Peter-focused episodes. The characters have real depth, but the closeness of their relationship has led to some uncomfortable territory. The show has depicted them in increasingly intimate situations. They've been trapped together. They've traveled through time and space together. They've shared secrets and vulnerabilities. There's nothing inherently wrong with depicting a close friendship. But the show occasionally crosses a line in how it portrays their bond. The pregnancy episode is the most extreme example, but there are others. Episodes where they're physically intimate in ways that feel wrong, even in the context of a platonic friendship. Moments where the show seems to forget or not care about the fact that one of them is a baby. Brian and Stewie also features a scene where Stewie gets his ear pierced. Brian does it for him using a pin. The piercing gets stuck, and Brian has to rip it out, causing excessive bleeding. It's graphic and uncomfortable to watch. Stewie wanted the piercing to look cool, but the reality is painful and bloody. The scene serves no real purpose except to add another shocking visual to an episode already full of them. The episode reveals that Brian voted for John McCain in the 2008 election. This surprises Stewie because Brian is usually depicted as liberal. Brian explains his reasoning, and they argue about politics while drunk. It's meant to show that even best friends can disagree on important issues. But the conversation happens while Stewie is still recovering from the botched ear piercing, and they're both intoxicated. Context matters. Later in that same episode, Stewie tells Brian that he uses him. He claims Brian has no real purpose in life beyond being Stewie's friend. He says he only wanted Brian to eat his waist to see how low Brian would go. It's a cruel speech that devastates Brian. Brian pulls a gun and points it at Stewie. The tension is broken when they realize a security camera has recorded everything, including the diaper scene. The revelation about the security camera footage is played for comedy. Brian is horrified that video evidence exists of him eating baby waste. He'll be humiliated if anyone sees it. But think about what that footage actually shows. It shows Brian being coerced at gunpoint into doing something degrading. If that footage got out, it would be evidence of Stewie's actions, not Brian's shame. The episode gets the stakes backward. By the end of Brian and Stewie, they reconcile. Stewie admits he was being cruel because he was scared about being trapped. Brian admits he genuinely loves Stewie and values their friendship. They have a touching moment where Stewie falls asleep as Brian reads to him. It's sweet and well executed, but it comes after nearly 20 minutes of disturbing content that the emotional ending can't fully redeem. The dynamic between Brian and Stewie works when the show remembers what it should be: a precocious child and his patient caretaker having adventures, a genius baby and an intellectual dog as unlikely best friends. When the show focuses on their conversations and their genuine affection for each other, it produces great content. But when the show uses their relationship as a vehicle for gross-out humor or shocking storylines, it crosses into uncomfortable territory. What's particularly interesting is that both Brian and Stewie are voiced by Seth MacFarlane. Every conversation between them is essentially MacFarlane talking to himself. He's writing both sides of their arguments. He's performing their emotional moments as both characters. In Brian and Stewie, MacFarlane is doing nearly all the voice work for the entire episode. That takes talent, but it also means one person is responsible for all the creative choices. MacFarlane has said he enjoys the Brian and Stewie episodes because they allow for different kinds of storytelling. The road episodes in particular let the show do musical numbers and more elaborate plots. He's defended the gross-out humor as being part of the show's identity. In interviews about Brian and Stewie, he talked about wanting to push boundaries and do something unexpected for the 150th episode. But wanting to push boundaries doesn't always mean you should. The diaper scene pushed boundaries that maybe should have stayed in place. The pregnancy episode explored territory that didn't need exploring. There's a difference between being edgy and being gratuitous. Family Guy has always struggled with finding that line, and the Brian and Stewie episodes showcase both sides of that struggle. The best Brian and Stewie episodes focus on their genuine friendship. Episodes where they help each other overcome obstacles, where they learn something about themselves through their adventures, where their differences complement each other rather than create conflict. These episodes show what the show is capable of when it's not just trying to shock people. But then there are episodes like Herpy the Love Sore, where Brian gives Stewie herpes. Brian has herpes and knows it. He shares a drink with Stewie without telling him. Stewie contracts the disease from Brian's negligence. It's not played as a huge betrayal, but it should be. Brian gave a baby a lifelong disease through carelessness. That's not a minor plot point. That's a fundamental violation of trust. The episode tries to make it about Brian's selfishness and his pattern of bad behavior. And to be fair, those are real character flaws that the show has established. Brian can be self-absorbed and thoughtless. But giving someone herpes, especially a baby, is beyond just being a bad friend. It's a serious breach that should have permanent consequences for their relationship. Instead, the show treats it as just another Brian screw-up. What makes the Brian and Stewie relationship so central to Family Guy is that they represent the show's best and worst impulses. When the writers are focused on character and story, these two produce the most compelling content. When the writers are focused on shock value and gross-out humor, these two become vehicles for the most disturbing scenarios. It's the same characters and the same relationship, producing wildly different results based on what the writers want to accomplish. The tragedy is that Family Guy has proven it can do sophisticated emotional storytelling with these characters. The dramatic moments in Brian and Stewie work. The character development across the road episodes is real. When Stewie saves Brian from death in Christmas Guy, it's genuinely moving. The foundation is there for something special, but the show keeps undermining that foundation with choices designed purely for shock value. As Family Guy has continued for over 20 years, Brian and Stewie have become more complex characters. They've gained depth and history. Their friendship feels real in ways that Peter's relationships with his friends don't. But that realism makes the disturbing content hit harder. When you care about characters, seeing them in degrading or upsetting situations feels worse. The show can't have it both ways. Either these are cartoon characters in absurd situations, or they're developed characters with real emotional stakes. Family Guy tries to do both, and the result is uncomfortable dissonance. The Brian and Stewie episodes will continue to be a focal point of Family Guy. They're popular with fans. They give the writers room to experiment with format and tone. But hopefully future episodes learn from the mistakes of the past. Focus on what makes these characters work together. Build on their genuine bond. And maybe lay off the scenes involving bodily waste and hybrid pregnancies. That's not too much to ask. Peter Griffin is the titular Family Guy. He's the main character, the patriarch of the Griffin household, a father of 3, and husband to Lois. And he is without question one of the worst fathers and husbands ever depicted in television. Not worst in the sense of being an ineffective character. Worst in the sense that his actions toward his family range from neglectful to abusive to outright criminal. In early seasons, Peter was just kind of dumb and impulsive. He'd get into schemes that backfired. He'd say insensitive things without meaning real harm. He was a flawed dad, but you could see he loved his family. But as the show progressed, Peter became meaner, more selfish, more willing to actively harm his family for his own benefit. The evolution of Peter Griffin from lovable idiot to genuinely terrible person is one of the most disturbing arcs in the entire series. Let's start with one of the absolute worst Peter storylines. Fresh Air from Season 12. In this episode, Peter learns that his father-in-law, Carter Pewterschmidt, is incredibly wealthy. Carter decides to leave his entire fortune to Chris instead of Lois. Peter becomes obsessed with getting access to that money, and his solution is to marry his own son. Think about that premise for a second. A father decides the best way to access his son's inheritance is to marry him. Peter literally proposes to Chris with Lois's engagement ring. He tricks Lois into divorcing him. He goes through with an actual marriage ceremony to his teenage son. The episode depicts Peter attempting to commit incest for financial gain. Now, the show presents this as Peter being greedy and stupid. He's not actually attracted to Chris. He just wants the money and figured out a loophole. But that doesn't make it better. If anything, it makes it worse. Peter is willing to destroy his marriage and traumatize his son purely for money he hasn't even inherited yet. It's not temporary insanity or mind control. It's a calculated plan that Peter follows through on despite everyone telling him how wrong it is. Chris goes along with it because he's desperate for his father's attention. Peter has been such a neglectful dad that Chris sees this as finally getting quality time with Peter. That's heartbreaking. A teenage boy agrees to marry his father because it's the only way he can get Peter to pay attention to him. The episode accidentally reveals just how badly Peter has failed as a parent. The marriage doesn't last, obviously. Peter realizes he can't go through with it and things go back to normal. But you can't undo that premise. The show depicted a father proposing to his son. They showed the wedding. They had Peter and Chris living together as a married couple. That happened, and it happened because Peter valued money more than his relationship with his wife and son. Fresh Air is extreme, but it's not an outlier. It's the logical conclusion of Peter's established character. He's been shown repeatedly choosing his own interests over his family. The episode just took that tendency to its darkest possible extreme, and the fact that the show could even conceive of this storyline shows how far Peter has fallen from his Season 1 characterization. Then there's Peter's treatment of Meg. Meg is the family punching bag. Every character is mean to her, but Peter is the worst about it. He's called her ugly. He's told her she's worthless. He's physically assaulted her. He's endangered her life. He's made it clear he wishes she didn't exist. And this isn't occasional. It's constant. Nearly every episode features Peter being cruel to Meg. In Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg finally stands up for herself. She tells the family exactly how terrible they've been to her. She points out all the abuse and neglect, and she's right about everything. The family is forced to confront how badly they've treated her. But then the episode ends with Meg deciding to go back to being the scapegoat because the family needs someone to dump on. She sacrifices herself to maintain family harmony. That ending is presented as noble. Meg is being selfless by accepting abuse so everyone else can be happy. But it's actually horrifying. The show is saying that Meg's abuse is necessary and that she should accept it for the greater good. It validates Peter's treatment of her. It suggests that families need a target for their dysfunction, and Meg should be grateful to serve that purpose. Peter's worst moment with Meg might be in Barely Legal, where she develops a crush on Brian. Brian handles it poorly, but Peter's involvement makes it worse. He doesn't support his daughter through confusing feelings. He doesn't help her understand healthy relationships. He mocks her. He makes jokes about how pathetic it is that she has feelings for the family dog. His daughter is going through something difficult, and Peter's response is ridicule. But Peter doesn't just fail Meg. He fails all his children. In Lottery Fever, the family wins the lottery, and Peter immediately becomes a tyrant. He forces his friends Joe and Quagmire to degrade themselves for his entertainment. He shoots them with BB guns while they perform. When Joe asks him to avoid his face, Peter intentionally shoots him in the eye. This is Peter with power and money. He becomes actively sadistic. The episode establishes that wealth doesn't change Peter. It just removes the constraints that were keeping his worst impulses in check. When he doesn't have to worry about consequences, Peter is cruel. He enjoys inflicting pain. He revels in humiliating people. That's who Peter really is when nothing holds him back. In Screams of Silence. The story of Brenda Q, the guys discover that Quagmire's sister is being abused by her boyfriend Jeff. Peter's response includes making jokes about the abuse. When they discuss what names the couple's future children might have, Peter suggests Slappy and Bruisey. He's making light of domestic violence. He's using someone's trauma as setup for punchlines. Even when the show tries to tackle serious topics, Peter makes them worse. Peter's treatment of Lois has degraded significantly over the years. In Lois Comes Out of Her Shell, he gives a birthday speech for her in front of all her friends. He criticizes her aging body. He says terrible things about how she looks. He tops it off with a confusing, "I love you, sweetheart," that doesn't undo any of the damage. Lois is humiliated in front of everyone she knows because her husband decided her birthday party was the right time to roast her appearance. Then there's sibling rivalry, where Peter becomes obsessed with sex with overweight Lois. He doesn't find her attractive when she's fit, but when she gains weight, he can't get enough. So Peter actively encourages her to gain more weight. He stuffs her face with cake. He pushes her to eat constantly. Lois gains so much weight that she has a heart attack. She nearly dies. And even after the heart attack, Peter still wants to have sex with her. This storyline is Peter literally trying to kill his wife through forced weight gain so he can satisfy his fetish. That's not a character flaw. That's attempted murder through negligence. Lois's health crisis happens as a direct result of Peter's actions, and he shows no remorse. He doesn't learn anything. The episode just moves on, like Peter didn't nearly kill his wife for sexual gratification. In Petarded, Peter takes a MacArthur Fellows program test and scores so poorly he's declared intellectually disabled. The show's language, not mine. Peter gets a certificate declaring him mentally challenged, and his immediate response is to abuse this status. He starts a fight in church. He barges into women's bathrooms. He causes chaos everywhere he goes while blaming it on being intellectually disabled. His worst offense in this episode happens at a fast food restaurant. Peter jumps behind the counter and accidentally pours hot grease all over Lois. She's burned severely. She nearly dies from her injuries. It's not framed as Peter making a mistake. It's framed as Peter being reckless while using his intellectual disability as an excuse for bad behavior. He put his wife in the hospital because he was playing around in a restaurant kitchen. The hot grease incident is particularly disturbing because it's presented visually. We see Lois covered in burning oil. We hear her screams. The animation makes it clear how much pain she's in. This isn't a cutaway gag that happens off screen. It's part of the main story. We watch Peter nearly kill his wife through stupidity and carelessness. The Perfect Castaway features Peter and the guys going on a fishing trip. They're lost at sea and presumed dead. Lois eventually moves on and remarries. But then Peter returns. He's angry that Lois got remarried, even though he was gone for months and everyone thought he was dead. Peter's ego is so huge that he can't understand why his wife wouldn't wait indefinitely for a dead man to return. Peter's jealousy in this episode is irrational and cruel. Lois grieved him. She moved on with her life. She found happiness with someone else. And Peter's response is anger that she didn't remain devoted to his memory forever. He makes her feel guilty for trying to be happy after losing him. It's emotional manipulation disguised as comedy. In Brian the Closer, Peter becomes jealous of Brian's toy rope. He doesn't want the toy himself. He just can't stand that Brian has something he doesn't. Peter steals the rope and drives away with it, even though Brian has his teeth sunk into it. Brian gets dragged behind the car and crashes into a fire hydrant. All his teeth break. His mouth is destroyed. And Peter immediately loses interest in the toy now that he's won. Peter caused permanent damage to Brian over a toy he didn't even want. the family refuses to help pay for Brian's dental work, even though Peter caused the injury. Brian has to go to Quagmire for help, which leads to its own problems. But Peter faces no consequences for his actions. He destroyed Brian's teeth out of petty jealousy, and everyone just moves on. The episode Family Goy reveals that Lois is Jewish. Peter's response is to try to shoot her. He's visited by the ghost of his deceased stepfather Francis, who warns him he'll go to hell for being married to a Jewish woman. Peter takes this seriously enough to attempt murder. He literally aims a gun at his wife because of her religious heritage. The scene is played for comedy, but the action is attempted spousal homicide. Peter's relationship with Stewie is characterized by complete neglect. Peter barely acknowledges Stewie exists. He can't understand him like the audience can. But even accounting for that disconnect, Peter shows no interest in his youngest child. Stewie could be in danger, and Peter wouldn't notice. This neglect allows storylines like Stewie's pregnancy to happen without adult intervention. Peter is so checked out that a baby can go through an entire pregnancy under his roof without him noticing. In Brian Griffin's House of Pain, Chris and Meg accidentally knock Stewie down the stairs. Stewie suffers a head injury that's potentially fatal. But instead of taking him to the hospital, the family decides to cover it up. Peter actively participates in hiding Stewie's injury from Lois. He makes Lois run over Stewie with the car to create a different explanation for his injuries. Peter would rather stage a car accident than admit they weren't watching Stewie properly. That episode reveals Peter's willingness to endanger his children to avoid consequences. He'd rather risk Stewie's life than face Lois's anger. And this isn't an isolated incident. Peter consistently chooses self-preservation over his children's well-being. His parenting philosophy seems to be avoiding responsibility at all costs. Turban Cowboy has Peter accidentally shooting Cleveland Jr. He sees a shadowy figure climbing through Cleveland's window and fires his gun. It turns out to be Cleveland's teenage son sneaking back home. Peter shot a teenager because he was playing Neighborhood Watch with his friends and wanted to use his gun. The shooting is framed as Peter being racist because Cleveland Jr. is black, but it's also Peter being criminally negligent with a firearm. The aftermath of shooting Cleveland Jr. is about Peter dealing with accusations of racism. The neighborhood turns against him. His friendship with Cleveland suffers, but the focus should be on the fact that Peter shot a teenager. He nearly killed his friend's son because he was being reckless with a weapon. The racial dynamics are important, but they overshadow the fundamental crime Peter committed. Peter has also been shown physically abusing his coworkers for fun. In Patriot Games, he gets a job with the New England Patriots. He immediately starts hurting his colleagues during practice. He's not trying to play the game well. He's just enjoying being violent. This is Peter when given any authority or power. He uses it to hurt people. In Lottery Fever, Peter forces Quagmire to perform while shooting him with BB guns. He shoots Joe in the face, deliberately, after Joe asks him not to. Peter has money and power in this episode, and his first instinct is to humiliate and harm his friends. These are supposed to be people he cares about. His response to having money is making them suffer for his amusement. Welcome Back, Carter features Peter working for his father-in-law's company. Carter assigns him to drive Lois around as punishment. Peter is supposed to be her chauffeur, but he's so bad at it that he endangers her constantly. He's not trying to do a good job. He's resentful that he has to serve his wife. The episode is about Peter refusing to respect Lois, even in a professional capacity. Peter has declared himself a deity on multiple occasions. In I Dream of Jesus, he becomes convinced he's found Jesus and starts a cult around him. When that falls apart, Peter decides he's a god himself. In If I'm Dying, I'm Lying, Peter lies about Chris being terminally ill to get a TV show back on the air. When the lie is exposed, Peter claims he healed Chris through divine power. People start worshiping him. God sends plagues against the Griffin family as punishment. The plague storyline is particularly bad because Chris almost dies. God is punishing Peter's blasphemy by harming his family. Chris is an innocent victim of his father's lies. He didn't claim to be terminally ill. He didn't claim his father was a deity, but he nearly pays the ultimate price for Peter's ego. That's Peter's parenting in a nutshell. His children suffer the consequences of his actions. In The Tan Aquatic with Steve Zissou, Peter discovers that Chris is being bullied by a 13-year-old named Kyle. Peter's response is to fight the child himself. He doesn't teach Chris how to stand up to bullies. He doesn't talk to Kyle's parents. He beats up a middle schooler. The scene is animated to show Peter being violent with a child. It's not played as Peter defending Chris. It's played as Peter being pathetic for fighting someone so much younger. Peter has caused countless deaths through his incompetence and recklessness. In Burning Down the Bayet, he helps Mort burn down his pharmacy for insurance money. The fire spreads out of control. A banner Peter lost causes a bus accident. Multiple people die as a result of Peter's actions. He shows no remorse. His friend Joe investigates the case, and Peter never confesses. He got away with causing multiple deaths through criminal activity. Happy Halloween features Peter creating a hologram of himself to take care of his family while he goes out with friends. He'd rather spend time at the bar than with his wife and kids. And rather than just asking Lois if it's okay, he creates an elaborate deception. The hologram, Peter is programmed to do all the things real Peter should be doing. It's a visual representation of Peter's absence from his family's life. In multiple episodes, Peter has contemplated or attempted suicide. He's discussed the best methods. He's acted on these thoughts. And while the show presents this as dark comedy, it reveals Peter's mental state. He's so unhappy with his life that he'd rather not exist. But instead of getting help or making changes, he just makes everyone around him miserable too. Peter's worst quality might be his complete inability to take responsibility. When something goes wrong, it's never his fault. He blames others. He creates elaborate excuses. He doubles down on bad decisions rather than admitting error. This makes him incapable of growth. He can't learn from mistakes because he won't acknowledge making them. The episode Veteran Guy has Peter stealing a jet ski from a child. He doesn't just take it. He grabs the child's hands and slams his face into the vehicle repeatedly. The child is left bloody and wounded in the water. Peter rides off on the stolen jet ski without looking back. That's attempted murder of a child for a water toy, and it's not presented as a breaking point for Peter's character. It's just another scene in another episode. Peter has also been shown being complicit in numerous crimes. He's helped friends commit insurance fraud. He's robbed banks with Meg. He's started his own country to avoid paying taxes. He's smuggled illegal goods. He's assaulted people. He's committed property destruction. He's driven drunk. He's operated vehicles while intoxicated and claimed to know exactly how many beers he can have before becoming unsafe. That drunk driving cutaway from 3 Acts of God is particularly disturbing. Peter brags about knowing how many beers he can drink and still drive safely. The cutaway shows him driving home extremely intoxicated. When he arrives at his house, he says 7. But then we see he hit and killed 2 members of a family. He changes his answer to 6. The joke is that Peter thinks the cutoff is 1 beer before the amount that led to vehicular manslaughter. He's not horrified he killed people. He's just recalibrating his drunk driving limit. In a Mission Impossible, Peter decides he doesn't want Lois to have another baby. His solution is to destroy his sperm from the inside. He and Stewie travel into Peter's body in a submarine to reach his testes. The episode is a parody of Fantastic Voyage, but it establishes Peter's willingness to undergo absurd procedures rather than have an adult conversation with his wife about family planning. Peter has forgotten his children's names on multiple occasions. He's confused, which kid is which. He's called them by the wrong names, consistently enough that it's a pattern. This isn't just comedic forgetfulness. It's Peter being so uninvolved in his children's lives that he can't keep basic information straight. The cutaway gag in The Juice is Loose shows Peter and Lois crying over a grave. The headstone reads, Peter Griffin Jr. The implication is they had another child who died. Peter allegedly killed him by shaking him to stop his crying. This is presented as a throwaway joke, but it's depicting Peter committing infanticide. He shook a baby to death. And it's just a quick gag before the episode moves on. As Family Guy has continued, Peter has become less of a character and more of a vehicle for whatever the plot requires. If the episode needs someone to do something horrible, Peter does it. If they need someone to be monumentally stupid, Peter's your guy. The consistency of his character has been sacrificed for joke delivery, but the accumulation of all these terrible acts creates a portrait of someone who should be in prison. Peter Griffin is a bad father, a bad husband, a bad friend, a bad employee, a bad neighbor, a bad citizen. He's bad at everything except being exactly what the show needs him to be in any given moment. And what the show needs is usually someone willing to do terrible things for comedy. The result is a character whose rap sheet includes assault, attempted murder, child endangerment, animal cruelty, insurance fraud, and attempted incest. The tragedy is that Peter could be better. Early episodes showed he was capable of caring about his family. He'd sacrifice for them. He'd try to make things right when he messed up. But as the show prioritized shock humor over character consistency, Peter became a monster. A man-child whose actions have real consequences, but who never faces appropriate punishment. And that's perhaps the most disturbing thing about Peter Griffin. He keeps getting away with it. Some Family Guy episodes are so controversial they've been pulled from broadcast, banned from streaming services, delayed from airing, or had entire scenes cut by Fox before they could reach audiences. These aren't just episodes that sparked complaints. These are episodes where networks decided the content was too much, even for Family Guy's standards. And when Family Guy is too offensive for Fox, that's saying something. Let's start with the most infamous, banned episode. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein was originally scheduled to air in 2000 during Season 3. Fox pulled it before broadcast. The episode wasn't seen by audiences until 2003 when it aired on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block, and it didn't appear on Fox until 2004. That's 4 years of being too controversial for the network that airs the show. The premise is straightforward. Peter is terrible with money. He's struggling with accounting and financial planning. In his frustration, he wishes he knew someone Jewish because he's bought into the stereotype that Jewish people are good with money. Peter decides that if Chris converts to Judaism, he'll become smarter and more successful. The episode follows Peter's attempts to make Chris Jewish. The controversy centers on the song, I Need a Jew. Peter sings about wanting a Jewish person to handle his finances. The lyrics lean heavily into stereotypes about Jewish people and money. The song is written to sound like When You Wish Upon a Star from Disney's Pinocchio. In fact, the Bourne Company publishing house sued Family Guy for copyright infringement over this parody. They claimed the offensive lyrics harmed the value of the original song. Fox's concern wasn't just about stereotypes. They worried the episode would be seen as anti-Semitic. The network feared backlash from Jewish organizations and advocacy groups. They decided the risk wasn't worth it and shelved the episode. But here's the thing. The episode isn't actually anti-Semitic in intent. It's satirizing Peter's ignorance. The joke is supposed to be that Peter believes stupid stereotypes, but the execution is clumsy enough that the satire gets lost. When the episode finally aired, opinions were divided. Some Jewish viewers felt it was harmless satire. Others found it offensive regardless of intent. The problem with satirizing bigotry is that you have to make the satire clear. If your parody of racism is indistinguishable from actual racism, you've failed. And when you wish upon a Weinstein, walks that line carelessly. The episode's ban made it legendary among fans. For years, it was the lost Family Guy episode. People traded bootleg copies. It became more famous for being banned than it would have been if it just aired normally. The controversy gave it a mystique it didn't deserve. When people finally saw it, the reaction was mostly confusion about what the big deal was. It's offensive, but no more so than dozens of other Family Guy episodes. Then there's Partial Terms of Endearment, which might be the most genuinely controversial episode the show has produced. This one was deemed too hot for TV and went straight to DVD. It has never aired on Fox. It's not available on most streaming services. This is the one episode the network absolutely refused to broadcast. The plot involves Lois agreeing to be a surrogate mother for an infertile couple. But then the couple dies in a car accident. Lois is pregnant with their baby and has to decide whether to continue the pregnancy or have an abortion. The episode becomes a debate about abortion rights between Lois and Peter. They discuss the ethics and politics of the decision. Eventually, Lois decides to have an abortion. Fox refused to air this episode because abortion is too divisive. The network didn't want to deal with the fallout from depicting abortion in a comedy. Both pro-choice and pro-life groups would have complained. Advertisers might have pulled out. The FCC might have gotten involved. Fox decided it wasn't worth the headache and banned the episode from broadcast entirely. What makes Partial Terms of Endearment interesting is that it's actually more thoughtful than most Family Guy episodes. The writers clearly put effort into presenting both sides of the abortion debate. Peter and Lois have genuine discussions about the issue. The episode doesn't completely trivialize the subject, but that seriousness is exactly why it couldn't air. Comedy shows can get away with offensive jokes because they're clearly jokes. When you try to seriously engage with controversial topics, you invite serious criticism. The episode ends with Lois having the abortion. That's the decision that made it unairable. If she'd decided to continue the pregnancy, the episode might have been okay. But showing a main character choosing abortion on network television was too much. It doesn't matter that the episode presented it as a legitimate choice. The very depiction was too controversial for Fox to touch. Turban Cowboy has a complicated history. The episode aired in March 2013. About a month later, the Boston Marathon bombing occurred. Fox immediately pulled the episode from streaming. They announced no plans to rebroadcast it. The episode disappeared for over 9 years. It didn't return to Hulu until September 2022. We've already discussed the Boston Marathon cutaway gag. Peter drives through marathon runners, killing them all. The coincidence of this airing a month before the real bombing was horrifying. But that cutaway wasn't the only controversial part of the episode. The main plot involves Peter befriending a Muslim man and accidentally getting involved with terrorists planning to blow up a bridge. The episode's portrayal of Muslims and terrorism is problematic even without the bombing connection. It plays into stereotypes about Islam and violence. The Muslim characters are depicted as friendly until suddenly they're revealed to be terrorists. It's lazy writing that reinforces harmful associations between Islam and extremism. After the bombing, these elements became impossible to ignore. Fox's decision to pull the episode made sense. They couldn't re-air an episode with a Boston Marathon murder scene right after the real attack. But the episode's removal also meant fans couldn't see how bad the terrorism plot was. When it finally returned to streaming, years later, people could judge it in full context. And the consensus was that it's an offensive episode, even without the bombing connection. Quagmire's Dad sparked massive controversy when it aired in 2010. The episode introduces Quagmire's father, Dan, who reveals that he's transgender and transitions to become Ida. The episode attempts to tackle transgender issues, but does so with all the grace of Peter Griffin attempting ballet. The main controversy comes from Brian's reaction. Brian sleeps with Ida before knowing about her transition. When he finds out, he vomits extensively. The scene shows Brian vomiting over and over because he's so disgusted. The implication is that having sex with a transgender woman is so revolting it causes physical illness. That's not comedy. That's transphobia. Lois and Peter also make transphobic comments throughout the episode. They misgender Ida. They make jokes about her transition. The episode tries to present Ida sympathetically as a person who was born in the wrong body. But it undercuts that sympathy by making her existence the punchline. The message seems to be that transgender people deserve acceptance, but also it's totally reasonable to be disgusted by them. Seth MacFarlane defended the episode by revealing that writer Steve Callahan had a similar experience with his own parent. Callahan was writing from personal experience about a parent's transition. MacFarlane argued this gave them permission to tackle the subject. But having personal experience doesn't mean you handled the topic well. And the reaction from transgender viewers and advocates made it clear the episode was harmful. The episode hasn't been banned, but it's frequently cited as one of Family Guy's most offensive. It appears on lists of transphobic media. Advocacy groups use it as an example of how not to depict transgender people. The damage to the show's reputation from this one episode has been significant. And unlike some controversial episodes that were accidents or poor timing, this one was just badly written. Family Gay aired in 2009 and generated immediate complaints. The premise is that scientists discover a gay gene. Peter participates in an experiment and accidentally gets injected with the gay gene. He becomes homosexually attracted to men. The episode follows Peter exploring his new sexuality, while Lois tries to reverse the condition. The Parents Television Council filed indecency complaints about this episode. They claimed it contained sexual content that violated broadcast standards. But the bigger issue is how the episode treats homosexuality. It's presented as something that can be turned on and off with a gene injection. That's not how sexuality works. The episode treats being gay as a temporary condition rather than an identity. The episode does include a musical number defending gay rights. Peter sings about how being gay shouldn't matter, and people should be accepted for who they are. The writers were clearly trying to make a pro-LGBTQ statement. But the framework undermines that message. You can't do an episode about gay being a condition you catch through injection and also claim you're being supportive. Fox approved the episode for broadcast, but it generated enough complaints that they had to defend their decision. The network argued the episode was satire, and the overall message was positive. But impact matters more than intent. If gay viewers found the episode offensive, then the positive message didn't land, and many LGBTQ viewers did find it offensive. Business Guy had the Parents Television Council filing complaints 2 days after it aired. The episode features Peter taking over a shipping company. But the PTC's complaint wasn't about the main plot. It was about sexual content and innuendo throughout the episode. The council cited specific scenes they felt violated decency standards. Fox didn't pull the episode or censor it in reruns, but the complaint showed how closely the PTC monitors Family Guy. They watch every episode looking for violations. They catalog offensive content. They file formal complaints with the FCC. Family Guy is under constant surveillance from groups determined to get it off the air. And episodes like Business Guy give them ammunition. The episode screams of silence. The story of Brenda Q isn't banned, but it should have been. This is the domestic violence episode we discussed earlier. It attempts to tackle abuse seriously, but fails miserably. The episode makes jokes about the abuse. It has Peter suggesting names for the couple's future children based on injury words. It presents murder as the solution to domestic violence. Critics argued the episode trivializes abuse and sends terrible messages to victims. If you're being abused, your friends should kill your abuser. That's not helpful. That's dangerous. Real victims of domestic violence need resources and support, not vigilante justice. The episode could have been a platform to share information about abuse prevention. Instead, it used abuse as setup for dark comedy. The episode was controversial enough that many reviewers called it one of the worst things Family Guy has done. It's not technically banned, but it's treated as a cautionary tale about what happens when comedy shows try to tackle serious topics without the tools to do it well. You can't spend 20 years being offensive for laughs and then suddenly expect audiences to take you seriously. PTV is the episode that directly satirizes the FCC and censorship. Peter starts his own TV network to air whatever he wants without restrictions. The FCC responds by regulating everything, including what people can say in their own homes. The episode includes the song criticizing the FCC that the actual FCC applauded, despite it being about them. The Parents Television Council launched a campaign encouraging members to file indecency complaints about this episode. Ironically, the PTC expressed doubt about whether they'd actually complain because the episode was satirizing them. The episode predicted its own controversy. It called out the PTC by name. It made the censorship debate part of the plot. And then, everything the episode predicted came true. PTV wasn't banned and actually won awards, but it represents Family Guy's most direct engagement with its critics. The show looked at the organizations trying to get it canceled and made an entire episode mocking them. It's a middle finger to censorship wrapped in an episode about a family dealing with FCC overreach. The boldness either impresses you or appalls you depending on where you stand. Several episodes have had scenes cut by Fox before airing. The Airport 07 cutaway about Quagmire at a funeral was censored from broadcast versions. The scene only appears in uncensored DVD releases. Multiple other episodes have had edits made to remove content Fox deemed too extreme. These edits often go unnoticed by casual viewers who only see the broadcast version. The challenge with documenting censored content is that it's censored. Unless you have access to uncut versions, you don't know what you're missing. Writers and producers have mentioned in DVD commentaries that scenes were cut, but they don't always specify what was removed. There's a shadow version of Family Guy that's even more offensive than what makes it to air. The Simpsons Guy crossover episode generated controversy before it even aired. The trailer featured Stewie making a rape joke. The Parents Television Council immediately criticized it. PTC President Tim Winter wrote to both Seth MacFarlane and Matt Groening complaining about the joke. The controversy happened in the promotional material before audiences saw the full episode. When the episode aired, it was mostly well received. The crossover fans had been wanting for years finally happened. But that rape joke in the trailer poisoned the well. It became the story instead of the crossover itself. Family Guy couldn't help itself. Even in a crossover episode with The Simpsons, they had to include offensive content that generated headlines. The thing about banned and censored episodes is they often become more famous than regular episodes. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein is more well known for being banned than for its actual content. Partial Terms of Endearment is legendary precisely because it never aired. The controversy makes people want to see what the fuss was about. This creates a perverse incentive for the show. Making controversial content generates attention even if it gets censored. Maybe especially if it gets censored. Every banned episode is free publicity. Every FCC complaint is proof the show is edgy and dangerous. Family Guy benefits from pushing boundaries even when they push too far. The punishment for going too far is increased fame. Fox is in a weird position with Family Guy. The show makes them money. It has a dedicated fan base, but it also generates constant complaints and controversies. The network has to decide where the line is. What content crosses from offensive but acceptable to offensive and unairable? And that line keeps moving as social standards change. What was okay in 2000 isn't okay in 2025. Jokes that seemed edgy 20 years ago now seem cruel or ignorant. The show's older episodes are increasingly difficult to defend, but they can't erase history. Those episodes exist. They're in syndication. They're on streaming services. The banned episodes might not air, but they're available if you know where to look. The banned and censored episodes reveal the limits of what even Family Guy can get away with. Abortion is too controversial. Some forms of bigotry are too blatant. Coincidental timing with real tragedies requires removal, but those limits are constantly tested. Every season pushes a little further. Every episode tries to find new ways to shock audiences. And when they push too far and face consequences, the show treats it as a badge of honor. Look how edgy we are. We got banned. We generated complaints. We're too real for television. The censorship becomes part of the brand. Family Guy isn't just an offensive show. It's the show that's so offensive it gets banned. That's the reputation they've cultivated, and the reputation they maintain. Religion has been a constant target for Family Guy's humor. The show has depicted God, Jesus, and religious figures in ways that have sparked thousands of complaints. The Parents Television Council has specifically cited religious mockery as one of their biggest issues with the series. When watchdog groups say that mockery of God is a constant on your show, you know you've made some choices. Let's start with The 2,000-Year-Old Virgin, which is one of the most religiously controversial episodes in the entire series. The premise is that Jesus Christ has returned to Earth and is living quietly in Quahog. Peter discovers him and invites him to dinner. During the meal, Jesus reveals that he's still a virgin. Peter decides this is wrong and takes it upon himself to help Jesus lose his virginity. The episode depicts Jesus as emotionally manipulative. Peter arranges for Jesus to sleep with Lois. Jesus presents himself as lonely and in need of comfort. But later Peter discovers this is an annual scam. Jesus goes around town every year claiming to be a virgin and emotionally conning married men into letting him sleep with their wives. He's portrayed as a deceitful womanizer who uses his status to manipulate people. The Media Research Center was strongly critical of this episode. They argued it depicted Jesus in an explicitly negative way that was offensive to Christians. And they're not wrong. The episode doesn't just make jokes about Jesus. It fundamentally recharacterizes him as a liar and sexual predator. That's not satire. That's taking a religious figure billions of people revere and turning him into a villain. The episode tries to have it both ways. There are moments where Jesus is portrayed sympathetically. He talks about the loneliness of being immortal. He discusses the burden of being the Son of God. But those moments get overshadowed by the reveal that he's been lying to sleep with people's wives. The character assassination is the punchline. What makes this particularly offensive to religious viewers is that Jesus isn't a historical figure, like a president. He's actively worshipped. For Christians, Jesus is literally God incarnate. Depicting him as a sexual con artist isn't just edgy comedy. It's attacking the central figure of their faith. And Family Guy knew exactly what they were doing. The episode even includes a joke where Peter directs complaints to the Family Television Council, which is obviously a reference to the Parents Television Council. The show is acknowledging they know this will generate complaints. They're preemptively mocking the people who will be offended. It's not ignorance. It's deliberate provocation. Then there's the cutaway gag from The Courtship of Stewie's Father that depicts God as a dirty old man. The scene shows God in bed with a prostitute. He's having sex with her while ignoring teenage Jesus, who needs help with a problem involving Joseph. God brushes Jesus off to continue with the prostitute. The scene presents the creator of the universe as more interested in sex than helping his son. This cutaway sparked immediate backlash from religious groups. The PTC cited it in their reports about the show's offensive content. The image of God depicted as a lecherous old man engaging with a prostitute while ignoring Jesus combines multiple offensive elements. It's sacrilegious, it's crude, and it serves no satirical purpose beyond shock value. The joke isn't making a point about hypocrisy in religion. It's not commenting on how religious institutions fail believers. It's just depicting God in the most offensive way possible because the writers thought it would be funny. That's Family Guy's religious satire, in a nutshell. Not clever commentary, just crude imagery designed to upset believers. Holy Crap, from Season 2, was the first episode to generate serious religious controversy. Conservative commentator L. Brent Bazell III wrote that he believed the episode promoted anti-Catholicism. The episode features Peter's father, Francis, who is an aggressive Catholic. Francis is portrayed as cruel and judgmental. He uses religion as a weapon to control and abuse his family. The episode does criticize religious extremism. Francis represents the kind of believer who weaponizes faith. But the execution led to accusations that the show was attacking Catholicism itself rather than just religious extremism. After this episode aired, Family Guy was briefly pulled from the schedule. Fox claimed it was due to low ratings, but the timing suggested the religious controversy played a role. The show returned, but the message was clear. Religious content generates complaints, and those complaints have power. Networks respond to organized campaigns from religious groups. The PTC and similar organizations have influence that translates to network decisions. Family Guy learned they could push boundaries, but there would be consequences. That hasn't stopped them from continuing to include religious content. In fact, the early success of the show after its revival in 2005 seemed to embolden the writers. They pushed further into religious territory. They depicted religious figures more explicitly. They made the satire less subtle and more direct. Every season included multiple episodes or cutaways targeting religion. The PTC's 2006 report, Faith in a Box, Entertainment, Television, and Religion, specifically called out Family Guy. The report concluded that mockery of God is a constant on the show. They documented instances of religious figures being portrayed negatively. They noted how often Christianity specifically was targeted for jokes. The report presented Family Guy as one of the most anti-religious shows on television. But here's where it gets complicated. Is Family Guy actually anti-religious, or is it just irreverent about everything? The show mocks all institutions: politics, entertainment, education, family structures. Nothing is sacred. Religion receives the same treatment as everything else. The problem is that for religious viewers, their faith isn't just another institution. It's the foundation of their worldview. When Family Guy makes fun of politicians, religious viewers might agree. When it mocks celebrities, they might laugh. But when it targets their God, it feels like a personal attack. The show treats religion with the same irreverence it treats everything else, but religion demands different treatment from believers. That fundamental disconnect creates inevitable conflict. The show has depicted Jesus multiple times beyond the 2,000-year-old virgin. He's appeared as a character in various episodes and cutaways. Sometimes he's portrayed sympathetically as a nice guy trying his best. Other times he's shown as incompetent or foolish. The inconsistency suggests the writers aren't making a coherent statement about Christianity. They're just using Jesus as a character when it's convenient. In one episode, Jesus works at a record store. In another, he's living a depressed, lonely life. In cutaways, he's been shown in various scenarios that reduce him from Messiah to punchline. Each individual instance might be defensible as just a joke, but the cumulative effect is a show that consistently diminishes and mocks the central figure of Christianity. God appears even more frequently than Jesus. He's been depicted in heaven, managing the universe. He's been shown as petty and vindictive. He's been portrayed as forgetful and disorganized. The episode I Dream of Jesus features God sending plagues to punish the Griffin family for Peter's blasphemy. God is shown as angry and vengeful rather than loving and merciful. These portrayals draw from Old Testament imagery of God as a force to be feared, but they strip away any majesty or reverence. Family Guy's God is powerful, but he's not worthy of worship. He's just another authority figure to be mocked. For viewers who pray to God daily, this isn't clever satire. It's offensive dismissal of their beliefs. The show has also targeted other religions beyond Christianity. There have been episodes and jokes about Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and other faiths, but Christianity receives the most attention because it's the dominant religion in the show's American setting. The writers know their audience is primarily Christian or culturally Christian. Mocking Christianity generates bigger reactions than mocking religions the audience is less familiar with. When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, which we discussed earlier, includes Jewish stereotypes, but also some positive portrayals. The Jewish characters are shown as successful and intelligent. The episode's message is arguably that Peter should appreciate Jewish people rather than stereotype them. But the execution is clumsy enough that it still generated controversy. The episode featuring Peter converting to Judaism includes scenes at a synagogue. The depiction of Jewish worship is fairly respectful, but it's sandwiched between jokes about Jewish stereotypes. The show wants credit for being balanced, but you can't claim balance when half your content is offensive stereotypes, even if the other half is positive. Islam has appeared in Family Guy, but less frequently than Christianity or Judaism. The show has generally been more careful with Islamic content, likely because of fear of violent backlash. After various incidents involving depictions of Muhammad, the show has been cautious. They'll make jokes about Muslims, but they avoid certain lines they're willing to cross with Christianity. That caution reveals the cynicism of Family Guy's approach. They'll mock Christianity extensively because they know Christian organizations will just file complaints. But they're more careful with Islam because the consequences could be more severe. It's not about principles. It's about risk assessment. They push boundaries where it's safe to do so. Religious holidays are frequent targets. Christmas episodes often subvert traditional religious elements. Easter has been depicted with dark humor. The show takes celebrations that have religious significance for millions of people and uses them as frameworks for offensive content. Again, the defense is that they mock all holidays. But religious holidays mean more to believers than secular ones. Road to the North Pole, which we discussed earlier, depicts a nightmare version of Christmas. Santa Claus exists, but he's been destroyed by consumerism and impossible demands. The episode criticizes how Christmas has become commercialized and divorced from religious meaning. But it does so by showing disturbing imagery of a broken Santa and suffering elves. The religious criticism gets lost in the dark comedy. Some of the religious content is genuinely clever satire. Episodes that criticize religious hypocrisy or question how faith intersects with modern life can be thoughtful. When the show examines how religious people don't always live up to their stated values, that's legitimate commentary. But those moments are rare compared to crude jokes about God having sex with prostitutes. The Parents Television Council has made Family Guy a primary target specifically because of religious content. They've organized letter-writing campaigns. They've filed formal complaints with the FCC. They've published reports documenting offensive content. They've contacted advertisers trying to pull funding from the show, and Family Guy has responded by mocking them in episodes. This dynamic has become part of the show's identity. Family Guy is the show that religious watchdog groups hate. That's appealing to certain viewers who see religion as outdated or oppressive. For them, the PTC's complaints are endorsements. If religious conservatives hate it, then it must be doing something right. The controversy becomes marketing, but the impact on religious viewers who might otherwise enjoy the show is real. There are people who like animated comedies, but can't watch Family Guy because the religious content is too offensive. The show has chosen to prioritize shocking religious viewers over including them in the audience. That's a deliberate choice that reflects the show's values and priorities. Seth MacFarlane himself is an atheist and has been open about his views on religion. He's made documentaries and given speeches criticizing religious belief. His personal views inevitably influence the show he created. When the creator of a show thinks religion is harmful, you can expect that perspective to appear in the content, and it does consistently. But MacFarlane employs writers with diverse views. Not everyone working on Family Guy is atheist. Some are religious. The writer's room includes people with different perspectives on faith. Yet the show's overall treatment of religion remains consistently irreverent and often offensive. That suggests a top-down approach where MacFarlane's views dominate the show's perspective. The religious controversy surrounding Family Guy raises questions about comedy and sacred topics. Should anything be off limits? Can comedy exist without the freedom to mock everything, including religion? Or are there topics that deserve protection from crude humor? These are legitimate questions without easy answers. Family Guy has clearly chosen maximum freedom over respect for religious sensitivity. They believe comedy requires the ability to target anything and anyone. If religion gets special protection, then you're limiting what comedy can do. That's a defensible philosophical position, but it comes with consequences in terms of audience and cultural impact. The show's treatment of religion has probably cost them viewers. Religious families who might otherwise watch aren't going to tune in when God is regularly depicted as a punchline. Conservative viewers who would enjoy the show's other humor can't get past the religious mockery. The show has chosen their audience by choosing their targets. What's particularly interesting is how the religious controversy has evolved over the years. Early episodes were shocking because this level of religious irreverence was rare on television. But as the show continued and other programs followed their lead, the shock value diminished. What seemed outrageous in 2000 seems almost tame by 2025 standards. The culture has shifted, and Family Guy helped push it. That cultural shift is part of increasing secularization in America. Fewer people identify as religious. Church attendance has declined. For younger viewers, the kind of religious content that shocked their parents might not register as particularly offensive. They didn't grow up in a culture where mocking God was unthinkable. Family Guy both reflects and accelerates that cultural change. But for the millions of Americans who remain deeply religious, Family Guy represents everything wrong with modern entertainment. It's crude, irreverent, and hostile to their values. It treats their most sacred beliefs as joke fodder. And it shows no signs of changing. If anything, the show has gotten more explicitly anti-religious over time as cultural attitudes have shifted. The religious controversy around Family Guy will continue as long as the show airs. Every season will include content that generates complaints from religious organizations. Every episode risks depicting God or Jesus in ways that offend believers. It's built into the show's DNA at this point. Family Guy without religious mockery wouldn't be Family Guy. And that's perhaps the saddest thing about the religious controversy. The show has had opportunities to be thoughtful about faith, to explore what religion means to people, to examine the role of belief in modern life with nuance and depth. Instead, they've chosen the easy path of crude jokes and shocking imagery. The mockery is lazy compared to what the show could do if it tried. Family Guy has attempted to tackle serious topics throughout its run. Sometimes these attempts result in surprisingly thoughtful episodes. More often, they result in the show stumbling through sensitive subject matter while still trying to maintain their signature crude humor. And nowhere is this more apparent than in how the show has handled domestic violence and abuse. Screams of silence. The story of Brenda Q is the most notorious example. This season 10 episode attempts to address domestic violence seriously. The title itself signals that this is meant to be a departure from typical Family Guy fare. The episode opens with Quagmire recovering from an injury. His sister Brenda, played by Caitlin Olsen, comes to visit him. She brings her boyfriend Jeff, voiced by Ralph Garman. From the moment Jeff appears on screen, the episode establishes him as abusive. He's controlling. He's verbally cruel to Brenda. He isolates her from her family. And the episode makes it clear, through Brenda's body language and reactions, that physical abuse is happening. This is not subtle. The show is depicting a realistic domestic violence situation. The guys realize what's happening and try to help Brenda. They tell her she needs to leave Jeff. They offer her support and resources. But Brenda insists that Jeff loves her and things will get better. She makes excuses for his behavior. She minimizes the abuse. This is an accurate portrayal of how abuse victims often respond. The psychology is correct. The dynamics are realistic. But then Peter starts making jokes. When they discuss Brenda and Jeff potentially getting married, Peter suggests names for their future children. He says Slappy and Bruisey, referring to how Jeff hits Brenda. These are jokes about domestic violence. The episode is trying to seriously address abuse, while also having Peter crack wise about it. The tonal. Whiplash is jarring. The episode features a heartfelt moment where Quagmire writes Brenda a letter begging her to leave Jeff. He expresses how much he loves her and how terrified he is for her safety. Glenn Quagmire, a character who we've established as predatory and terrible, is shown being genuinely protective of his sister. It's one of the few times the show gives Quagmire real emotional depth. The scene is effective and moving, but Brenda responds by announcing that she and Jeff are getting engaged. She's not leaving him. She's committing further. The guys are devastated. They've tried everything they can think of within legal means. So they decide to murder Jeff. They're going to kill him to protect Brenda. And the show presents this as the only solution. The guys attempt to kill Jeff, but their plan fails. Jeff figures out what's happening and nearly kills Quagmire. But Quagmire manages to kill Jeff in self-defense. With Jeff dead, the guys write a note to Brenda saying that Jeff left her. She believes it and moves on with her life. The episode ends with Brenda free from abuse, but under false pretenses. This ending is deeply problematic for multiple reasons. First, it presents murder as the solution to domestic violence. In reality, killing an abuser creates more problems than it solves. Victims need safety planning, legal protection, and support services, not vigilante justice. The episode could have used its platform to share information about abuse resources. Instead, it depicted murder. Second, the episode robs Brenda of agency. She doesn't leave Jeff on her own terms. She doesn't make the decision to escape. The decision is made for her by men who kill her abuser without her knowledge or consent. Then, they lie to her about it. Brenda never gets to process what happened or heal from the abuse. She just thinks Jeff left. Third, the episode uses domestic violence as a dramatic framework while still including comedy. The abuse itself is never funny, but the episode makes jokes around it. Peter's comments about future children named after injuries. Cutaway gags during serious moments. The tonal inconsistency undermines the serious message the episode claims to have. Critics were divided on screams of silence. Some praised the show for addressing domestic violence at all. They felt any attention brought to the issue was valuable. Others argued the episode was exploitative. It used a serious issue for drama while maintaining comedy elements that were inappropriate. The victims' advocacy community largely fell in the latter camp. The episode also makes Brenda the butt of jokes in ways that blame the victim. The guys are frustrated with her for not leaving. The show presents her continued relationship with Jeff as a choice she's making, rather than a situation she's trapped in. Real abuse victims face enormous barriers to leaving: financial dependence, fear of retaliation, custody concerns, social isolation. The episode oversimplifies these dynamics. What makes Screams of Silence particularly frustrating is that it's so close to being good. The performances are strong. Caitlin Olsen brings real emotion to Brenda. The depiction of abuse dynamics is mostly accurate. The episode clearly had good intentions, but it couldn't commit to being a serious examination of domestic violence because it's still Family Guy. The show's identity requires comedy, even when comedy is inappropriate. Then there's Quagmire's Quagmire, which flips the script by making Quagmire the abuse victim. He meets a woman named Sonia who shares his sexual interests. They start dating, and everything seems great. But then Quagmire shows up at the bar with a black eye. Sonia is physically abusing him. She's controlling and violent. She treats him the way abusive men treat women in relationships. The episode plays this mostly for comedy. Look at Quagmire, the predatory sex addict, getting abused by a woman. There's an element of comeuppance. This is what it feels like to be on the receiving end. But male victims of domestic violence are real. They face unique challenges, including not being believed or being mocked. And this episode mocks Quagmire for being a male abuse victim. His friends have to rescue him from Sonia. They stage an intervention and get him away from her. Once he's safe, Quagmire admits he prefers being in control during relationships. This line is meant to explain why things didn't work with Sonia. But in the context of everything we know about Quagmire, it's chilling. He prefers being in control. He's built devices to hold partners down. He's targeted vulnerable women. The admission confirms the predatory pattern. The episode could have used Quagmire's experience to create empathy, to show him understanding what it's like to be controlled and hurt by a partner, to have him reflect on his own behavior. But the show doesn't go there. Quagmire learns nothing from being abused. He just goes back to his usual behavior once the relationship ends. The abuse becomes just another wacky situation Quagmire found himself in. Meg's treatment by her family is ongoing psychological abuse that the show plays for comedy. Every episode features family members being cruel to Meg. Peter tells her she's worthless. Lois dismisses her concerns. Chris and Stewie mock her. Even Brian treats her poorly most of the time. The cumulative effect is a teenage girl being emotionally abused by everyone who should love and support her. The show acknowledges this dynamic in Seahorse Seashell Party. Meg finally snaps and tells her family exactly how terrible they've been. She lists their failures and cruelties. She points out how they've scapegoated her for years, and she's absolutely right. The family has been abusing Meg since the show began. Her speech is cathartic for viewers who've watched this pattern for years. But then the episode reveals that the family falls apart without Meg to dump on. They need a target for their dysfunction. So Meg decides to go back to being the family punching bag for the greater good. She accepts ongoing abuse to maintain family stability, and the show presents this as a noble sacrifice rather than a continuation of abuse. That ending validates every terrible thing the family has done to Meg. It says her abuse serves a purpose, that she should accept being mistreated because it helps others. That's not a healthy message. It's not empowering. It's encouraging victims to stay in abusive situations for the sake of others. The episode accidentally becomes an instruction manual for enabling abuse. The physical violence in the show is extensive. Characters hit each other constantly. The famous chicken fights between Peter and Ernie. The giant chicken involve brutal, extended combat. These fights are clearly comedic and absurdist, but they've normalized violence as entertainment. When real domestic violence appears in the show, it exists alongside this cartoonish violence. That context makes it harder to take serious violence seriously. When Peter can survive being thrown through buildings in a chicken fight, how are we supposed to react when Jeff hits Brenda? The show has trained us that violence is comedy. Switching gears to present violence as serious requires viewers to completely change their framework for understanding what they're watching. Lois has been physically assaulted by Peter multiple times. The hot grease incident we discussed earlier left her with severe burns. Peter has grabbed her roughly. He's endangered her through reckless behavior. In Lois Comes Out of Her Shell, he humiliates her emotionally. The pattern of Peter hurting Lois physically and emotionally is clear when you track it across episodes. But because it's animated, and because Peter is presented as stupid rather than malicious, the show expects us to forgive his actions. He doesn't mean to hurt her. He's just an idiot. That's the excuse the show offers for repeated harm. But impact matters more than intent. If your stupidity consistently harms your spouse, that's still abuse, even if you're too dumb to realize it. Brian's treatment of women could also be classified as abusive. He's emotionally manipulative. He uses his intelligence and supposed sensitivity to seduce women, then treats them poorly. He's cheated on partners. He's lied and deceived. He's used women for his own benefit, then discarded them. The show presents this as Brian being a flawed person, but it's a pattern of abusive behavior toward romantic partners. His kiss with Lois in Play It Again, Brian crosses into assault. Brian forces himself on her. Lois explicitly tells him no. He ignores her refusal and kisses her anyway. That's sexual assault. The show frames it as Brian making a romantic gesture that goes wrong. But there's nothing romantic about ignoring someone's explicit refusal of physical contact. It's assault. The episode deals with the aftermath by having Peter be angry with Brian. Their friendship is damaged. But the focus is on the betrayal of Peter rather than the violation of Lois. Lois's feelings about being assaulted are secondary to Peter's feelings about his friend making a move on his wife. Lois is treated as Peter's property rather than as the victim of assault. Stewie's abuse of Brian is extensive. He's threatened Brian with weapons. He's manipulated him emotionally. He's coerced him into degrading situations like the diaper scene we discussed. He's physically harmed Brian. The power dynamic between them is unhealthy. Stewie is a baby, but he's also a genius with access to advanced technology. He uses that advantage to control and hurt Brian. The show presents their relationship as friendship, but it often looks like abuse. The good moments between them make the bad moments worse. Real abusive relationships often include periods of genuine affection and connection. That's why victims stay. The abuse isn't constant. It's intermixed with love and good times. Brian and Stewie's dynamic mirrors that pattern. What makes Family Guy's handling of abuse particularly problematic is the inconsistency. Sometimes abuse is played for comedy, like with Meg. Sometimes it's presented seriously, like with Brenda. Sometimes the show seems aware that what it's depicting is abuse, and sometimes it seems oblivious. The lack of coherent perspective makes it impossible to understand what message the show is trying to send. Is abuse funny, or is it serious? Are victims responsible for leaving, or are they trapped? Should friends intervene with violence or with support? The show gives different answers depending on the episode. That inconsistency prevents Family Guy from saying anything meaningful about abuse. It just uses abuse as either drama or comedy, depending on what the plot requires. The show could do better. It could depict abuse accurately without making jokes. It could show victims finding real help through resources and support systems. It could examine why people become abusive and what recovery looks like for victims. It could use its massive platform to educate viewers about a serious issue. But that would require committing to seriousness in ways Family Guy refuses to do. The fans who defend these storylines argue that it's just comedy and shouldn't be taken seriously. But millions of people watch Family Guy. Some of those viewers are abuse victims. Some are abusers. Some are children who don't understand the difference between cartoon violence and real violence. The show's influence is real, even if its intent is comedy. When you depict abuse, victims staying in relationships because leaving is too hard, you're showing young viewers that dynamic normalized. When you show abuse being solved through murder, you're suggesting violence is the answer. When you make the abused person the punchline, you're teaching viewers that victims are fair game for mockery. These messages land whether the show intends them or not. Screams of Silence ends with a statistic about domestic violence. The show includes actual information about how common abuse is and where to find help. That shows the writers knew they were dealing with something serious. They tried to be responsible at the last moment. But a statistic at the end doesn't undo the messages throughout the episode. The most generous interpretation is that Family Guy doesn't know how to handle serious topics while maintaining its comedic identity. The show wants to address issues like domestic violence because tackling serious subjects makes the show seem more substantial. But it can't commit to seriousness because that's not what Family Guy is. So we get these awkward hybrid episodes that fail as both comedy and drama. The less generous interpretation is that the show uses serious issues like domestic violence as material without caring about handling them responsibly. Abuse provides drama and emotional stakes. It gives characters something to react to. The writers use it as a tool without considering the impact of how they depict it. The content is exploitative rather than thoughtful. Either way, the result is the same. Family Guy has repeatedly depicted abuse in ways that range from insensitive to actively harmful. The show has used violence against women as comedy. It's presented abusive relationship dynamics as normal. It's suggested that abuse victims are responsible for their situations. And it's done all this while occasionally pretending to care about the serious issue it's exploiting. The domestic violence and abuse storylines in Family Guy represent the show at its worst. Not because they're offensive in the same way as crude jokes, but because they take real suffering that real people experience and handle it carelessly. These episodes hurt in ways that shock humor doesn't. They betray the trust of viewers who've experienced abuse. And they do lasting damage to the show's credibility on any topic that requires sensitivity.